Hey, this is Neil, the 604 Atheist, and you're watching Atheist Edge on YouTube. Cheers.
Once upon a time, God married two sisters, Aholah and Aholibah. They cheated on God. A lot. I mean, a lot. They screwed half of Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria. They especially liked men who had penises the size of donkeys and could ejaculate like horses. Whew, that took a lot out of me. Okay, continuing. When God found out, he ordered Aholibah to be killed by the sword. He then cut off Aholibah's nose and ears and made her cut off her own breasts. Then he had her stoned to death. Finally, he killed their children and burned up their villages. And God lived happily ever after.
If you give birth to a boy, you will be dirty for 7 days. No one can touch you, and you won't be allowed to enter the sanctuary for 33 days. If you have a girl, well, your sentence is doubled.
Mountains, crystal clear river flowing down the middle of the street, shiny Jerusalem version 2.0 made entirely of gold. The city is perfectly square-shaped, 1,400 miles wide, but somehow big enough to hold every worthy person that ever existed. High walls made of red jasper stone with 12 gates. No sun or stars. God himself is the only light. So, heaven is a really weird concept. Theoretically, this is where every Christian is desperate to end up. Or at least it's a better alternative to going to hell, I suppose. Does anybody really have any idea, though, of what heaven is actually like? So there's loads of books that are written by people who had brain damage or some other kind of neurological accident and then claimed after the fact, sometimes very long after the fact, that while they were mentally incapacitated, they were in fact spiritually enraptured. But of course, everyone who claims to visit heaven has completely different and usually contradictory reports when they come back to visit us in the conscious world. But nobody, I don't think, has ever claimed to see anything like what's exactly in Revelation 21. There's a lot of weird symbolism here. And it does not seem like a real place, even a real fantastical sort of place. It's not a place that anybody would try to imagine being or as some sort of a post-existence paradise. But the symbolism that's being used here does actually make sense if you go all the way back into the earliest layers of Jewish apocalyptic thinking. And this is something that crystallized really following the sacking of Jerusalem and the exile in Babylon. So the what Judaism was before, we don't exactly know. There was alongside the apocalyptic concept in Judaism was pretty much everything around like what it meant to worship Yahweh. That all sort of came together at the same time. It's very likely that the entirety of the Pentateuch was put together, assembled in exile in Babylon, because they were worried that they wouldn't have access to any of these old stories or any of these ancient sites, and they wanted to preserve them in some way. It's likely that the temple, if there was a pre-exile temple, the relationship with that temple was crucial to at least some aspect of Judaism, or Judaism, such as it was. But the idea of it being like a special sacred place, a holy place, the house of Yahweh, and being the center of at least one form of the religious cult in Judah, at least in as much as it was remembered that way in the exile. More likely, in actuality, there were multiple holy sites, and worship was not as standardized. The theology was not as standardized. The stories differed from place to place. It was probably a lot more messy before the exile. But in the exile, the temple became, or at least the idea of the temple in Jerusalem, and it being centered there, and that being sort of the center of the world, that became a very big deal. And everything about the post-exile religion, Jewish religion, became about rebuilding Jerusalem and rebuilding the temple. That was their singular focus. And many of the prophets that existed at that point were also obsessed with this idea of a new Jerusalem rebuilt. Not necessarily in the here and now, because they thought that it was just never going to happen. It had been totally destroyed. All the people that mattered were taken into exile, and they had no idea, no way of predicting that they would ever go back. So all these ideas sort of came together when they thought that, no, this is our life as Jewish people in Judah. That is over in the here and now. We are not going back. That is done. And so this idea of the New Jerusalem and the new temple, that was sort of a, not exactly afterlife scenario, because the Jews didn't exactly have an afterlife scenario the way the Christians do. But it was kind of like if the world had a do-over, right? So at some point, Yahweh is going to intervene, and he's going to give everybody a do-over, and then there'll be a new Jerusalem and a new temple, and we're going to do it right this time. It was not going to be heaven exactly, but it was going to be like a second chance of some sort. So there's a little bit of overlap there. As I said, the prophets are obsessed with this. Ezekiel was obsessed with this. He wrote chapter after chapter about the temple, trying to preserve it as a sort of as a written document or a written record of the temple. Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, talked about rebuilding Jerusalem. Importantly, he talked about how the streets would be paved with sapphires and other precious stones. The kind of contributing to the otherworldly aspect of it. And so when we get to Revelation, what we're seeing is a continuation of this process, right? So Ezekiel, Isaiah, Daniel as well, these other prophets. And Revelation is trying to present itself as a continuation of this apocalyptic tradition, but putting a Christian perspective on it. So there's the critical thing, the critical difference with the New Jerusalem is that it doesn't have a temple. And that is essentially Christian, right? So in Revelation it says, I saw no temple in the city, for the temple is the Lord God the Almighty and the Lamb, right? So just like there's no need for a sun in the New Jerusalem because God is there and he's full of light and the light is everywhere, for the same reason there's no need for a temple because God is there. So you don't need a temple to function as the house of God, because if you're in heaven, you're in God's house. The whole thing is God's house, and so God is there. And so you don't need a temple there anymore. God lives right in the middle of everything. And this is exactly the distinction that made Christianity so especially unique among all the different various forms of Judaism which were in existence at the time, and most of which either focused on the Jerusalem temple and preserving it, or trying to replicate it elsewhere, or substituting something else for the temple, like the law, like coming up with the Pharisaical code, and that will be the rock upon which we build our faith. So Christianity said, no, we're not trying to replace the temple or preserve the temple or rebuild the temple. We don't care about the temple at all. The temple is done because we've got Christ. The temple is done because we've got Christ, and Christ is with us, and as long as Christ is within us, we don't need the temple anymore, right? Christ sustains us, right? We don't need to be part of this older tradition that's focused on the temple. And that was a key break with the form of with the leading forms of Judaism that had come before, that focused primarily on the temple. And that also allowed Christianity to innovate and make significant inroads, especially in Gentile populations, for which, everything that went along with temple worship and all the rules and laws and regulations associated with that, which we've already seen are just super weird. it was super weird to the Gentiles, and the Christians could say, well, we don't have to worry about any of that. We can throw that all out because we're done with the temple. The temple's done. So the temple, even the law could pass away and Christ would remain. And so that's really what heaven is. It's a sort of a culmination of that. And so, yes, it looks very weird. It's not really meant to be taken literally. It's really meant to be a representation of this fact of Christian theology, the fact that there will be a passing away of the old things and a rebuilding of new things, just like in Jerusalem, or just like with Judaism. But now we don't need these other trappings. We don't have to rebuild the temple because now we just have Christ.
It is not Islamophobic or culturally insensitive to criticize a belief system that demeans women, homosexuals, and non-believers. And no, it is not racist. Islam is not a race, it's a religion. And yes, I think that that's something that can get confused by people, mainly because I think, especially like in our U.S. culture, a lot of people have an idea of what someone who practices Islam might look like, but that's separate of the idea of whether or not you agree with the ideals put forth in a religious text. So, no, I can't say that it's Islamophobic in order to disagree with these ideas. So that is a bad argument if someone is saying, if that's their response to it.
Some unmarried Mormons engage in soaking. Shh! It has nothing to do with rain. Soaking is the practice of inserting the penis into the vagina and remaining still. And wait a minute, why am I getting all the penis ones? Anyway, okay, continuing. Anyway, so, soaking is when you're in the coitus and you're not doing this movement, the thrusting and the moving of the in and out. Do you get the idea? Please tell me you get the idea. Premarital sex is forbidden in the Mormon religion, but many Mormons believe soaking is a loophole in the rule and is technically not really sex. Similarly, anal and oral sex are sometimes practiced for the same reason. So, is it just me, or did you notice a lot of weird penis and vagina stuff in religions and it's just a lot. It's a lot of weird stuff. And so, yeah, I'm gonna go now. See you later.
Putting a little ram's blood on your ear will make you holy. It's as simple as that. Why are you doing that? Why are you going out there and giving to the poor? And why are you why are you an altar boy? Having things done to you in the Catholic Church and stuff like that. Just give you a ram. Prick it somewhere and take you a little bit of blood, put it on your ear, and you're holy.
Allah looks forward to filling hell with humans and jinn. And this comes from the Quran in 11:119. And there's a side note here that jinn are made of fire, so I guess they won't suffer too much.
I read this. I can't believe it. I really can't believe it. Okay. Yeah. This is what 42% of the U.S. believes in. Okay. 42% believe this, okay? Males came from dust, females came from a male rib.
Quote from Quran 8:30, and when non-believers plot against Muhammad to wound him fatally, Allah also plots, and Allah is the best of plotters. Okay, so According to the Quran, it's a infallible religious text. It's perfect, and it if you're exploring things in science, it should adhere perfectly to it. That's a claim that the Quran makes and that the Bible makes, and lots of other texts. There's debate over whether those religious texts were written for that purpose. Like the Bible wasn't necessarily written as a historical account, wasn't intended to be an historical account, even though it's seen to be that by a lot of people today. But just for the Quran, for this one, in Quran 15:19 and 57, there's a claim that the earth is flat. In the Quran 16:68, that bees eat fruit. Quran 17:20 and 2:23, no egg is needed to conceive a child, just sperm. Women are just incubators. The Quran also says that the earth is motionless in space. The stars are little lamps. Asexual reproduction is impossible. And that one actually, you might think that that's true, but then you have animals on the earth that do reproduce asexually. They reproduce on their own. There's also a claim that Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn each have their own heaven. That's interesting. Humans are the only species that display homosexual behavior. Oh no. Oh no. Oh geez. That is completely untrue. The heart is the organ responsible for thought. That's interesting. There are 11 planets in the solar system. The sun orbits the earth. That's also one of many claims that are matched with the Bible. The Bible also makes that claim. And then lastly, the earth is shaped like an egg, prolate spheroid, instead of its actual oblate spheroid shape. I'm going to pretend like I know what that is. All right.